The crimson alert lights bathed the bridge of the UES Defiance in an ominous glow as Captain Jake Morrison stared at the holographic display before him. 27 alien warships hung in the void like predatory sharks, their hulls gleaming. With the deadly promise of annihilation, silence on the bridge was so thick you could cut it with a plasma blade, and, honestly, Jake was considering it. "Captain," his communications officer, Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez, called out, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "We're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel." Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the controls, a detail that didn't escape Jake's notice. Emma had been through hell at the Titan Colony massacre, and if she was scared, everyone should be terrified. Jake's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. He'd been expecting this moment for months, ever since humanity had told the Galactic Council exactly where they could shove their so-called peaceful integration demands. The memory of that diplomatic disaster still burned in his mind like acid. 3 years of negotiations, 3 years of humanity trying to play nice with species that viewed them as barely evolved primates. Well, today those primates were about to show their teeth. "Put it through," Jake ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd stared death in the face more times than he cared to count. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the intimidating form of Admiral Corex, the Council's supreme military commander. His reptilian features were set in an expression of cold determination, vertical pupils dilating as he spoke. The alien scales rippled with bioluminescent patterns that Jake's briefings had taught him signified absolute confidence. Arrogant bastard. Captain Morrison, Corex's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, each word dripping with the condescension of a species that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. "By order of the Galactic Council of United Worlds, you will surrender your vessel and submit to immediate transport to Station Nexus for judgment. You have 30 minutes to comply." Jake felt the familiar surge of anger that had driven him through 3 tours of duty in the Outer Rim conflicts. The Council's arrogance never ceased to amaze him. These creatures had spent so long being the biggest predators in the galaxy that they'd forgotten what it felt like to face something that might actually bite back. "Admiral, with all due respect, you can take your ultimatum, and Captain," Corex interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow managed to carry more menace than a roar. "Perhaps you misunderstand the gravity of your situation. Your pathetic fleet of 12 vessels faces the combined might of the Council's Enforcement Division. Your technology is inferior, your numbers laughable. Surrender now, and we will show mercy." Have you ever noticed how bullies always talk about mercy right before they're about to crush you? Jake had seen this dance before on playgrounds, in back alleys, and across star systems. The strong always believed their strength made them righteous. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances, their fear radiating like heat from a fusion reactor. Jake could practically taste their terror in the recycled air. 27 ships against 12. On paper, it wasn't even a contest, it was a massacre waiting to happen. The tactical display showed the overwhelming firepower arrayed against them. Hegemony dreadnoughts, with enough plasma cannons to vaporize a small moon. Aquatic collective bioships that could regenerate from near-total destruction in crystalline. Vessels from the Silicon Syndicate that were practically immune to conventional weapons. But Jake Morrison hadn't survived the Battle of Kepler Station by playing it safe. He'd learned something in that hellish conflict that the Council had apparently forgotten. Sometimes the scariest opponent isn't the one with the biggest gun, but the one with nothing left to lose. "Admiral," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins like liquid fire. "I think you're the one who doesn't understand the situation. You see, we've been preparing for this conversation for a very long time. The understatement of the century, really. 6 months of sleepless nights, 6 months of pushing human engineering to its absolute limits, 6 months of asking his crew to trust him with something that existed only in the darkest corners of theoretical physics." Corex's eyes narrowed to reptilian slits. "Preparing? You mean preparing to die?" The alien's confidence was still there, but Jake caught the slight hesitation. The micro-expression that suggested uncertainty was creeping into that scaled skull. "No," Jake replied. a cold smile spreading across his face like winter frost. Preparing. To make sure that if we die, we take as many of you bastards with us as possible. Computer, initiate Protocol Omega. The bridge erupted in surprised gasps from his crew. Even his most trusted officers looked at him like he'd just announced his intention to juggle live antimatter. Protocol Omega was theoretical a last resort. Measure that existed only in classified files marked with enough warning labels to paper a small space station. But Jake had spent the last 6 months making it very real, very dangerous, and very, very final. Captain, his tactical officer, Commander Tyler Brooks, whispered urgently, leaning close enough that Jake could smell the fierce sweat on his uniform. Protocol Omega isn't just dangerous, it's insane. Tyler had been with him since the academy, had followed him through 3 wars and countless skirmishes, but this was clearly testing the limits of his loyalty. Sometimes, Jake said, his eyes never leaving the screen where Admiral Corex was beginning to look less like a confident predator and more like prey sensing a trap. Insane is exactly what the situation calls for. Think about it. When was the last time you solved an impossible problem by playing by the rules? When was the last time David beat Goliath by fighting fair? On the view screen, Admiral Corex's confident expression began to shift as his sensors detected the energy signatures, now emanating from the human vessels. His reptilian features contorted with something that might have been uncertainty, or possibly recognition of something his species' ancient military doctrine had never accounted for. The bioluminescent patterns on his scales flickered erratically. A sign Jake's xenobiology training told him indicated severe stress. "What are you doing?" Corex demanded, his voice losing its silky authority and taking on an edge of genuine concern. "Something you never expected," Jake replied, watching with satisfaction as the tactical display showed energy readings that should have been impossible. "We're changing the rules of the game." It's the question hanging in the space between the two. Fleets wasn't whether humanity would survive the next 30 minutes, it was whether anyone would. And as Jake Morrison stared into the alien admiral's increasingly worried eyes, he realized that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't the one that guaranteed victory, but the one that guaranteed your enemy couldn't afford to win. But what exactly was Protocol Omega? And why did it have the power to make a 3,000-year-old galactic empire reconsider everything they thought they knew about warfare? The answer would change not just this battle, but the very foundation of how civilizations dealt with each other across the stars. Speaking of changing the game, if you want to see how small actions can create massive results over time, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding where tiny investments create life-changing wealth. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES Indomitable, watching the swirling nebula of the Horsehead Sector paint. Impossible colors across the void, like some cosmic artist had spilled their palette across infinity. Her reflection in the reinforced transparent aluminum showed a woman in her mid-40s, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform bearing the insignia of the Terran Space Command. But what that reflection couldn't show was the steel-cold determination burning behind her eyes, the kind of resolve that had carried humanity from cave dwellers to star travelers in just a few millennia. "Captain," came the voice of her XO, Commander James Rodriguez, through the cutting through her thoughts like a plasma blade through butter. Priority message from Earth Central Command. Sarah touched the interface panel with practiced precision, and the holographic display materialized before her in a shower of blue light. Admiral Morrison's weathered face appeared, his expression carrying the grim weight of a man who'd seen too many wars and knew another one was coming. The deep lines around his eyes told stories of battles fought in the darkness between stars, of decisions that had cost lives but saved civilizations. "Captain Chen, I'll be direct." Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone who'd earned his rank through blood and sacrifice rather than political maneuvering. "The Galactic Council has issued what they're calling a final diplomatic overture. They're demanding we attend peace negotiations on Station Nexus within 30 standard days, or face what they term collective enforcement action." Sarah's jaw tightened like a steel trap. She'd been expecting this since the incident at Kepler Station 6 months ago. When human security forces had refused to allow council inspectors aboard a civilian research vessel, memory still burned, watching those arrogant alien bureaucrats demand access to human technology, treating Earth's children like wayward primitives who needed constant supervision. The sheer audacity had been breathtaking. "What are our orders, sir?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Harrison had made America's and humanity's position crystal clear from day one. "The President has been clear from the beginning, Captain. We don't negotiate with self-appointed galactic overlords. Humanity governs itself, establishes its own colonies, and chooses its own path among the stars. The Council's 3,000-year rolled. Boys Club doesn't get to dictate terms to us. Ever notice how bullies always dress up their ultimatums as diplomatic overtures? Like putting a bow tie on a rattlesnake. Somehow makes it less venomous." The transmission continued with strategic updates and fleet positions. But Sarah's mind was already racing through tactical scenarios at light speed. The Galactic Council commanded the combined military might of over 800 species. Civilizations that had been perfecting warfare while humanity was still figuring out how to make fire without rubbing two sticks together. Humanity had been traveling between stars for less than 2 centuries, a cosmic blink of an eye compared to their potential enemies. On paper, it wasn't even a contest. It was like comparing a rowboat to an aircraft carrier, a slingshot to a nuclear arsenal. The smart money would bet on humanity's complete annihilation within hours of any serious conflict. But paper, Tsar knew, had never been humanity's strongest medium. After all, the British had superior numbers, better training, and more resources than a ragtag group of colonial rebels in 1776. How did that work out for them? After the transmission ended, Sarah made her way through the ship's corridors to the tactical center, her boots clicking against the deck plating with military precision. The Indomitable was one of humanity's newest vessels, testament to the rapid technological advancement that had characterized their expansion into space, while other species had spent millennia perfecting their existing technologies. Humans had this annoying habit of completely reinventing the wheel every few decades. Tactical Center buzzed with activity as their senior staff hunched over displays, showing data streams from across human space. These were the best and brightest humanity had to offer, officers who'd proven themselves in the crucible of interstellar conflict. Each face told a story of determination forged in the fires of adversity. "Situation report," Sarah ordered her, voice cutting through the controlled chaos like a conductor taking charge of an orchestra. "Lieutenant Commander Park." The ship's intelligence officer activated the central display with a gesture. Holographic representations of enemy fleets materialized in the air, like deadly constellations. Council fleet movements suggest they're assembling a show of force. Initial estimates put it at over 200 vessels from at least 30 different species. The numbers were staggering enough firepower to glass entire planets, reduce star systems to cosmic dust. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as the tactical implications sank in. This wasn't just a show of force, it was preparation for genocide. "Their mistake," muttered Chief Engineer Petrov, her Russian accent thick with the kind of disdain usually reserved for particularly incompetent politicians. They think numbers equal victory. They've never faced an enemy that thinks outside their precious protocols." Sarah studied the data streams flowing across the displays like digital waterfalls. The Council's approach was as predictable as a Swiss watch overwhelming force delivered through conventional tactics. They would arrive in perfect formation, broadcast their demands with all the pomp and ceremony of a medieval court, and expect humanity to roll over and show its belly like a submissive dog. "They're treating this like a police action," she said aloud, the pieces of the puzzle clicking together in her mind. Show up with enough firepower to intimidate, make their demands, and expect immediate compliance. "It's worked for them for 3,000 years. The question is," said Commander Rodriguez, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen the impossible become routine. "How do we respond to 800 species worth of military technology? What do we have that they don't?" Sarah smiled in expression that had made more than one enemy reconsider their life choices and caused seasoned veterans to check their life insurance policies. We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds. We change the rules of the game. But how do you change rules that have governed galactic civilization for millennia? How do you convince an empire that's never lost a war that maybe, just maybe, they're about to face something they've never encountered before? The next several hours were spent in intense planning sessions that would have made Pentagon strategists weep with envy. The Indomitable wasn't alone. Scattered throughout the sector were 24 other human vessels, each commanded by officers who had cut their teeth in the conflicts with individual council species. They'd learned hard lessons about galactic warfare, chief among them being that their enemies expected them to fight like civilized beings. Humanity, they discovered, had a fundamentally different definition of civilization. While other species saw warfare as a gentleman's sport with rules and protocols, humans saw it as survival, and survival had no rules except winning. Captain, reported Communications Officer Walsh, her voice tight with urgency. We're receiving similar diplomatic overtures from council fleets in 7 other sectors. They're not just targeting our newest colonies, they're going after our established systems too. Sarah nodded grimly. The council was finally taking humanity seriously. As a threat, fortunately for them, they were about to learn why that was a catastrophic mistake. When you corner a species that evolved on a death world that climbed to the top of the food chain by outsmarting everything that tried to eat them, you don't get submission, you get innovation born of desperation. Signal the fleet, she ordered, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone about to unleash hell itself. Execute Protocol Pandora. The bridge crew exchanged glances loaded with meaning. Protocol Pandora was something that existed in the gray areas of interstellar Lareas that humanity had become expert at navigating like legal ninjas. It wasn't technically illegal under any treaty they'd signed, primarily because they'd never signed any treaties that mattered. When you're not part of the club, you don't have to follow the club rules. As Sarah watched her crew implement the protocol with practiced efficiency, she reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had tried playing by the Council's rules initially, like naive children believing adults actually cared about fairness. They'd submitted applications for colonial rights, followed established procedures with bureaucratic precision, and waited patiently for approval like good little supplicants. The Council had taken 3 years to respond with a rejection based on humanity's insufficient technological development and concerning aggressive tendencies. 3 years of forms, committees, and diplomatic double talk, all leading to a cosmic middle finger. By the time the rejection arrived, humanity had already established 47 colonies. Sometimes the best response to bureaucracy is simply ignoring it entirely. Protocol Pandora is active across all sectors, reported Rodriguez, a note of satisfaction creeping into his professional demeanor. The council fleets are responding with some confusion. Sarah allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The council was about to learn that there was a significant difference between refusing to negotiate and being unprepared for what came next. They'd mistaken humanity's diplomatic patience for weakness, never realizing it was actually preparation. Time. Open a channel to the council fleet, she ordered, settling into her command chair like a chess grandmaster, about to reveal a winning strategy 20 moves in the making. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what was clearly a council command vessel. It's the alien commander, some kind of crystalline being that looked like it had stepped out of a geological museum, stared at her with what might have been surprise, or possibly the crystalline equivalent of constipation. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable, she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them. I understand you have something you wanted to discuss. Exactly was Protocol Pandora, and why had it turned the galaxy's most powerful military alliance into a collection of confused spectators? The answer would redefine everything the Council thought they knew about human capabilities and human audacity. Just like in investing, sometimes the biggest returns come from strategies that seem impossible at first. If you want to see how small, consistent actions can create massive results over time, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding, where patience and persistence create wealth that would make even galactic empires jealous. Emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic that would have made a Wall Street trading floor during a market crash look like a meditation retreat. The Great Assembly Hall should witness 3 millennia of diplomatic triumph and witness the rise and fall of entire civilizations, now echoed with the frustrated chittering roars and harmonic distortions of representatives grappling with something they'd never faced before, an enemy they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and apparently couldn't defeat without destroying themselves in the process. Council Speaker Vera Thorne, one of the few human-like species in the assembly, struggled to maintain order as reports poured in from across the galaxy like a tsunami of bad news. Her silver hair caught the ornate lighting as she raised her ceremonial staff with the desperation of a teacher trying to control a classroom full of panicked children. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she looked more human than most humans yet. Her species had never produced anything quite as terrifying as actual humanity. "The situation is unprecedented," she announced, her voice carrying across the vast chamber with the authority of someone trying to convince herself as much as her audience. "Captain Morrison's fleet has effectively held our enforcement division hostage for the past 48 hours. Our military advisors confirm that their quantum resonance threat is—" She paused, searching for a diplomatic way to say, "absolutely terrifying. ... credible." Ambassador Taurus of the Hegemony Coalition slammed his massive fist against his speaking platform with enough force to crack the reinforced crystal, his bull-like features twisted with fury that had been building for decades. "This is madness. You cannot allow a single species to dictate terms to the entire galaxy. The precedent this sets," the precedent, interrupted Dr. Maya Thompson, the Council's chief xenopsychologist, stepping forward with the calm authority of someone who'd spent her entire career studying the galaxy's most dangerous species, "is that we may have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human psychology from day one. Ever wonder what happens when the smartest people in the room realize they've been completely wrong about something for 50 years? The silence that followed was so complete you could hear a pin drop in vacuum. The chamber fell silent as Dr. W. Thompson activated her holographic display with practiced precision. Charts and graphs filled the air like a 3-dimensional textbook, showing decades of research into human behavior patterns that now looked about as accurate as ancient maps warning here be dragons. The data was all there, but apparently nobody had bothered to connect the dots until humans started threatening to blow up star systems. For 50 years, we've analyzed human actions based on our own cultural frameworks." She continued, her voice carrying the weight of a scholar admitting that her life's work had missed the most important point. "We assumed they thought like us, fought like us, and wanted the same things we wanted. We were wrong on every single count." The display shifted to show Earth's geological and biological history. And suddenly the chamber was filled with images that made most council species homeworlds look like luxury resorts, natural disasters that occurred with clockwork regularity, predator attacks that would give nightmares to species that had evolved without natural enemies, and environmental challenges that most civilizations would classify as uninhabitable hellscape. Humanity evolved on what we classify as a Class 9 death world. Dr. Thompson explained, her words hitting the assembly like physical blows. Their homeworld experiences regular catastrophic events that would devastate most of our civilizations. Ice ages that last for millennia, volcanic eruptions that block out the sun, asteroid impacts that cause mass extinctions, supervolcanic explosions that reshape continents, events that force them to develop survival strategies we've never needed, because we've never faced anything like them. Admiral Nash Williams, the Council's military advisor and a veteran of more conflicts than most species had wars, leaned forward in his chair with the intensity of a man suddenly understanding why every battle against humans had gone sideways. "What kind of survival strategies are we talking about here?" "Redundancy," Dr. Thompson replied, and that single word carried more implications than a 1,000-page military doctrine. "Every human institution is designed to function independently. If necessary, their military doctrine assumes reinforcements might not arrive. Their economic systems are built to survive complete trade disruptions. Their colonial policies ensure that no single catastrophe can eliminate their species because, on their homeworld, catastrophes aren't possibilities, they're certainties." Think about that for a moment. while other species built civilizations. Assuming tomorrow would be like today, humans built everything assuming tomorrow might bring the apocalypse. And they were usually right. The implications began to sink in across the chamber like water through a sinking ship. Ambassador Taurus's voice carried a note of uncertainty that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. You're saying there? Not expansion-minded in the traditional sense? They're not trying to build an empire? They're survival-minded, Dr. Thompson confirmed, her words reshaping 3,000 years of galactic political theory. They spread across the galaxy not to conquer it, but to ensure their species' survival. And they'll fight any threat to that survival with a desperation we've never encountered because desperation is their default setting. Speaker Thorne felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the chamber's climate control. Quantum resonance threat isn't a bluff, Dr. Thompson finished with the finality of a death sentence. It's a logical extension of their survival instinct. They're willing to destroy themselves and their enemies if it means preserving their species' independence, because that's exactly how they've survived every extinction-level event their planet has thrown at them for millions of years. The chamber erupted in debate that sounded more like a zoo at feeding time than a diplomatic assembly. Voices rose in dozens of languages, translation systems overloaded with emotional context, and the careful protocols that had governed galactic civilization for millennia crumbled like ancient paper. But underneath the cacophony, a terrible realization was taking hold like a virus spreading through the collective consciousness. The Galactic Council had spent 3,000 years maintaining order through the threat of overwhelming force, the promise that resistance would cost more than compliance. It was a system that had worked flawlessly because every rational species understood the mathematics of survival: submit or be destroyed. They'd never encountered a species that considered mutual destruction an acceptable outcome because they'd never met a species that had survived by accepting unacceptable outcomes. There's more, Dr. Thompson continued, her voice cutting through the argument like a laser through fog. Our intelligence suggests that every human colony is equipped with similar Samson protocols, the ability to deny their resources to occupying forces through various means of comprehensive destruction. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone in the room realizes they've been playing checkers while their opponent has been playing three-dimensional chess with live explosives. You're telling us, Ambassador? Taurus said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a species' growing understanding of their own mortality, that we can't conquer them, can't control them, and can't intimidate them without destroying ourselves in the process. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Dr. Thompson replied with the calm authority of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. The Council's entire approach to governance is based on the assumption that rational species will choose submission over destruction. But humanity evolved in an environment where destruction was always possible, always imminent, and they learned to not just survive it, but thrive in spite of it. Admiral Williams stood up with the mechanical precision of a man whose worldview had just been completely shattered, his weathered face pale with understanding. Then how do we deal with them? How do you negotiate with a species that considers mutually assured destruction a Tuesday? We don't, Speaker Thorne said quietly, her words carrying the weight of galactic history coming to an end. We can't govern a species we can't understand, can't predict, and can't control without destroying ourselves. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of their situation became clear. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace by ensuring that the cost of defiance was always greater than the cost of compliance. It was elegant, efficient, and absolutely dependent on dealing with rational actors who valued their continued existence. Humanity had just proven that they considered the cost of compliance to be infinite, and the cost of defiance to be irrelevant, as long as they took their enemies with them. There is one option, Dr. Thompson said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more revolutionary potential than any weapon in the galaxy.
Practice something
We've never tried before in 3,000 years of galactic governance. The entire chamber held its breath, waiting for the answer that might save them allure, destroy everything they'd built, which is, we could treat them as equals. But what would treating humanity as equals actually mean for a galactic civilization built on hierarchy and submission? And more importantly, would the Council's pride allow them to take the first step toward a completely new kind of peace? Speaking of revolutionary changes that seem impossible at first, if you want to see how small, consistent actions can create massive transformations over time, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding where patience and persistence create results that seem impossible until they become inevitable. The neutral station constructed for the negotiations was a marvel of engineering that would have made the International Space Station look like a paper airplane. A joint project between humanity and the three council species that had supported recognizing human independence. The massive structure hung in the void like a chrome and crystal cathedral, its rotating sections generating artificial gravity while its gleaming hull reflected the light of distant stars. It was beautiful, functional, and completely unprecedented. In galactic history, Captain Jake Morrison found himself in the surreal position of sitting across from Admiral Corex in a conference room that felt more like a scene from science fiction than his actual life. Just weeks ago, they'd been enemies preparing for a battle that could have destroyed entire star systems. Now they sat as representatives of sovereign powers, attempting to forge a new kind of peace, the kind that comes not from submission, but from mutual recognition that some fights aren't worth winning. The irony was thick enough to cut with a plasma sword. Here was Jake, a small-town kid from Ohio who joined the Space Navy to see the galaxy, now negotiating the future of galactic civilization with a reptilian alien who could probably bench press a small moon. "The terms are acceptable," Admiral Corex said, his reptilian features showing signs of what Jake had learned was grudging respecter, a facial expression that on a creature with scales and vertical pupils looked remarkably similar to someone who'd just bitten into a lemon but was trying to be polite about it. "Humanity acknowledges the Council's authority over participating species. The Council acknowledges humanity's right to self-governance. With the understanding," Jake added, his voice carrying the weight of recent victory and the knowledge that this moment would echo through history, "that any attempt to impose Council authority over human space will be considered an act of war." "Yes," Corex agreed, though his scales rippled with what might have been amusement horror, possibly the reptilian equivalent of nervous laughter, "though I suspect recent events have taught the Council that war with humanity is ... unprofitable." Think about that word choice for a moment. Not impossible, not unwinnable, profitable. Even in diplomatic victory, Jake recognized the businessman's mentality that had kept the Council in power for 3 millennia. They weren't admitting defeat. They were acknowledging that the cost-benefit analysis had shifted in humanity's favor. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying the alien admiral who had become an unlikely partner in forging this new agreement. The conference room's neutral lighting made Corex's scales shimmer like armor, a constant reminder that this creature belonged to a species that had conquered star systems when humans were still figuring out agriculture, yet here they were, equals at a negotiating table. "Admiral, can I ask you something?" Jake said, his curiosity getting the better of his diplomatic training. "Of course. During our standoff, you really thought we were bluffing, didn't you?" Corex's vertical pupils dilated, slightly a physiological response Jake had learned indicated either intense interest or barely controlled fear. Given the context, probably both. "Until your quantum resonance fields reached critical threshold, yes, the concept of mutual assured destruction as a negotiating tactic was foreign to our strategic thinking. And now?" "Now," Corex said slowly, each word carefully chosen, like a surgeon selecting instruments, "I understand that humanity operates under different survival parameters than the rest of the galaxy. Your species frightens us, Captain Morrison." Jake felt a surge of satisfaction that he tried to keep off his face and probably failed completely. Good. Fear breeds respect. Respect breeds caution. And caution prevents the kind of misunderstandings that lead to unnecessary conflicts. The negotiations continued for 3 more days that felt like 3 years, with representatives from across the galaxy participating via quantum communication. The conference room became a hub of activity that would have made the United Nations Security Council look like a quiet book club. Holographic displays showed real-time translations in dozens of languages. while diplomatic protocols older than human civilization tried to adapt to a completely unprecedented situation. The document that emerged, formerly known as the Terran Accords, was a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise that managed to satisfy species who had been enemies for millennia, while establishing clear boundaries for the future. It was the kind of agreement that looked simple on paper, but represented thousands of hours of careful negotiation, cultural translation, and the occasional moment where someone had to explain why humans considered certain things non-negotiable. But Jake knew. The real change wasn't in the legal framework scrolling across the displays. It was in the fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed conflict and cooperation. For the first time in recorded history, a major galactic power had achieved independence, not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple act of making submission more expensive than recognition. Commander Tyler Brooks, who had remained aboard the Defiance during the negotiations, contacted Jake via secure channel with news that would have sounded like fantasy just weeks earlier. "Captain, we're receiving reports from across human space. 7 council species have formally withdrawn from full membership, choosing associate status instead." Jake smiled, feeling like a chess player who'd just realized his opponent had been playing checkers all along. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained galactic order for 3 millennia was evolving into something more flexible and resilient. Change was spreading through the galaxy like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. "Any word from Earth?" "Command," Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Admiral Thompson sends her congratulations. She also wanted me to inform you that the President has approved your promotion to Admiral and appointed you as humanity's first galactic ambassador." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. By refusing to be conquered, humanity had inadvertently changed the very nature of galactic governance. It had proven that cooperation achieved through mutual respect was more stable than order maintained through fear. It was like discovering that the best way to win a poker game was to convince everyone else that a different game entirely was more fun. Admiral Korek said, drawing Jake's attention back to the negotiation table where history was being written in real time. "There is one thing I must know. During our confrontation, were you truly prepared to trigger the quantum resonance cascade?" Met the alien's gaze without flinching, letting the weight of absolute truth settle between them. "Admiral, the most important thing you need to understand about humanity is that we never make threats we aren't prepared to carry out. If you had opened fire, we would have triggered Protocol Omega, even knowing it would mean your own death, especially knowing it would mean our own death." "Gosh," Jake replied with the calm certainty of someone who'd stared into the abyss and made peace with what he saw there. "The moment we proved we could be controlled through threats, every human colony in the galaxy would have become a target. Sometimes the only way to ensure survival is to make conquest too costly to contemplate." Korex was quiet for a long moment, his reptilian features showing something that might have been profound respirator, possibly indigestion from trying to process human logic. "Your species has taught us something valuable, Admiral Morrison. True strength doesn't come from avoiding conflict, it comes from being prepared to survive it." 3 days later, the Terran Accords were signed in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy with more pomp and circumstance than a presidential inauguration. For the first time in galactic history, the Council had formally recognized a species' right to exist outside their authority. It was a moment that would be remembered long after the stars themselves had burned out. But as Jake watched the ceremony, surrounded by beings from dozens of worlds celebrating an agreement that would reshape galactic civilization, he knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy was learning that diversity of approach led to stability, not chaos. The old order was ending, but what was replacing it was something stronger, a galactic community based on mutual respect rather than mutual submission. The question now wasn't whether humanity would survive in this new galaxy, was what other impossible things might become possible when everyone stopped assuming the old rules were the only rules, just like in building wealth. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from strategies that seem impossible until they become inevitable. If you want to see how small, consistent actions can create massive transformations over time, check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding, where patience and persistence create results that reshape entire futures. 6. Months after the standoff at Kepler Station, Captain Sarah Chen found herself in the strangest situation of her career, and considering she'd once negotiated a prisoner exchange with sentient gas clouds, that was saying something. She was sitting across a conference table from Fleet Commander Zethkar, not as enemies preparing to annihilate each other, but as representatives of sovereign powers negotiating a mutual non-aggression pact that would reshape galactic civilization. Forever, the neutral station where they met was a marvel of engineering that made the International Space Station look like a child's toy joint construction project between humanity and the Altarian Republic. One of the few council species that had supported recognizing human independence from the beginning. The massive structure rotated slowly in the void, its crystal and metal sections gleaming. It's like a technological cathedral suspended between the stars. The irony wasn't lost on either party, that they were negotiating aboard a structure that represented exactly the kind of cooperation the Council had initially sought to prevent. Here was living proof that species could work together as equals rather than master and servant, creating something beautiful and functional without anyone having to surrender their independence or dignity. The terms are acceptable, Zethkar said, his four compound eyes reviewing the final draft of what would become known as the Terran Accords with the intensity of a lawyer, reading the fine print on a contract worth trillions. Humanity acknowledges the Galactic Council's authority over participating species, and the Council acknowledges humanity's right to self-governance. With the understanding, Chen added, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd stared down impossible odds and won, that any attempt to impose Council authority over human space will be considered an act of war. Yes, Zethkar. Agreed. Those mandibles clicked with what she'd learned was amusement. Apparently, even alien bureaucrats appreciated a good joke when they heard one. Though I suspect the Council has learned that war with humanity is ... unprofitable. That word choice still made Chen smile. Not impossible, not unwinnable, profitable. Even in diplomatic revolution, the galaxy's oldest civilization thought like accountants. The cost-benefit analysis of trying to conquer humanity had shifted so dramatically that peaceful coexistence was now the smart money bet. The months following the Kepler incident had been a revelation for both sides, like watching two different species discovered they'd been speaking different languages while using the same words. The Council had discovered that humanity's unreasonable approach to conflict extended to every aspect of their civilization in ways that defied traditional political science. Their economic systems were designed to function during wartime, with redundancies that kicked in automatically when trade routes were disrupted. Their research and development programs assumed that enemies would attempt to steal or destroy their work. So critical technologies were distributed across multiple independent facilities. Their social structures were built to maintain cohesion under extreme stress, with leadership protocols that could function even if entire command chains were eliminated. Think about that for a moment. While other species built civilizations, assuming peace was the natural state, humans built everything assuming war was always just around the corner. And they were usually right. Humanity, for their part, had learned that the Galactic Council's apparent arrogance was actually a form of institutional trauma that would have required galaxy-wide therapy to address properly. After 3 millennia of maintaining peace through superior force, they literally didn't know how to deal with a species that refused to be intimidated. It was like watching a boxer trying to figure out how to fight someone who kept threatening to blow up the entire arena. "There is one thing I must ask," Zethkar said, his 4 eyes focusing on Chen with the curiosity of a scientist studying a particularly interesting specimen. "During our standoff, you were prepared to destroy an entire system rather than submit to Council authority. Was it truly your intention to carry through with that threat?" Chen met his gaze steadily, letting the weight of absolute truth settle between them like a physical presence. "Commander, Commander. The most important thing you need to understand about humanity is that we never make threats we aren't prepared to carry out. If you had chosen to press your attack, we would have triggered the stellar resonance devices. Even though it would have meant your own death, especially because it would have meant our own death," she replied with the calm certainty of someone who'd made peace with the unthinkable. The moment we proved we could be controlled through the threat of force, every human colony in the galaxy would have become a target. We've learned through bitter experience that sometimes the only way to ensure survival is to make conquest. Too costly to contemplate. Zethkar was quiet for a long moment, his alien features showing something that might have been profound respect or possibly existential horror. "Your species frightens us," he said finally. Good Chen replied with a smile that had probably ended more conflicts than most weapons. "Fear breeds respect. Respect breeds caution. And caution prevents the kind of misunderstandings that lead to unnecessary conflicts." The Terran Accords were signed 3 days later in a ceremony that was broadcast across the galaxy with more fanfare than a Super Bowl halftime show, marking the first time in galactic history that the Council had formally recognized a species' right to exist outside their authority. The document was a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise that managed to satisfy everyone while offending no one, a feat that would have impressed even the most seasoned Washington politicians. But the real change wasn't in the legal framework. Scrolling across holographic displays, it was in the fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed conflict and cooperation. Like watching the rules of physics get rewritten in real time, within a year, 7 other species had withdrawn from full council membership, choosing instead the associate status that allowed them to participate in galactic commerce while maintaining their independence. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained order for 3 millennia was evolving into something more flexible and resilient. Like a tree learning to bend with the wind instead of breaking, Dr. Vashti, now serving as the Council's first director of Xenocultural Affairs, published a paper that would reshape galactic diplomacy for generations to come. The Terran paradigm, as it came to be known, argued that true galactic stability required not uniformity, but diversity of approach, a revolutionary concept that would have gotten her exiled just years earlier. "Humanity has taught us that strength doesn't come from avoiding conflict," she wrote in words that would be quoted in diplomatic academies across the galaxy, "but from being prepared to survive it. A galactic civilization that can only function under optimal conditions is inherently fragile. We need species that think differently, that prepare for different contingencies, can adapt to circumstances we haven't anticipated." The changes weren't universally welcomed, of course. Several hardline council species viewed the recognition of human independence as a dangerous precedent that would lead to chaos and the collapse of everything they'd built over 3 millennia. They were partially correct. The old order was indeed ending like a chapter closing in the galaxy's history book. But what replaced it was something stronger, a galactic community based on mutual respect rather than mutual submission, cooperation, chosen freely rather than enforced through fear. Captain Chen, now promoted to Admiral and serving as humanity's first galactic ambassador, often reflected on the beautiful irony of their situation during quiet moments aboard her new flagship. In refusing to be conquered, humanity had inadvertently conquered the very concept of conquest itself. The galaxy was learning that cooperation achieved through mutual respect was more stable than order, maintained through force, a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations to come. The Galactic Council still existed, still maintained peace among its member species, and still dealt with the countless challenges of managing a diverse galactic civilization. But they no longer assumed that their way was the only way, or that species who chose different paths were automatically threats to be eliminated. And in the outer reaches of the galaxy, human colonies continued to expand like seeds carried on stellar winds, each one a testament to their species' fundamental belief that survival required not just the ability to fight, but the willingness to ensure that fighting was never the only option. The crisis was over. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, new challenges were already forming that would test this new paradigm in ways no one could yet imagine. In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't in refusing to negotiate, was in forcing the galaxy to negotiate with itself about what true strength really meant. Just like in building wealth, sometimes the most powerful transformations come from strategies that seem impossible until they become inevitable. If you want to see how small, consistent actions can create massive changes over time, Check out our next video about the incredible power of compounding, where patience and persistence create results that reshape entire futures.